One of these women was an actress. One was a real hospital patient who had stopped speaking. And one was followed for months inside a nurse training film presented by nursing organizations and a pharmaceutical company's education unit. All three were presented as evidence, proof of what mental illness looked like, how it sounded, and who had the authority to explain it. But look again. The woman is visible. The authority explaining her is usually a man. The closer the camera moves, the less control she appears to have over the story. In the 1950s, psychiatry did not remain inside the hospital. It entered educational films and network television. These productions promised to tear down the shame surrounding mental illness. Some were compassionate, some were startlingly progressive. But while teaching the public how to see suffering, they also taught it whom to believe. The first woman is Caroline. Alone in her room and unable to sleep, she reaches toward sleeping pills while contemplating suicide. A film follows her backward through childhood grief and fear, then forward into psychotherapy. The second woman is known only as Doris L. She sits almost motionless in a California state hospital. Her husband begs her to speak. A doctor waits. A network camera keeps rolling. The third woman is called Trudy. A student nurse sits beside her day after day, trying to make contact without forcing her to speak. This time, the person being examined is not only the patient, it is the nurse. 3 women, 3 different kinds of truth, and one question none of the films can answer for us. When psychiatry finally allowed the public to see its patients, did being seen mean being heard? In 1954, the Mental Health Film Board released The Lonely Night. Its opening is almost noir: empty storefronts, dark windows, strangers awake after midnight. The narrator speaks of loneliness as if it were a hidden country, one that could exist even in a crowded room. Then the film finds Caroline. Her loneliness is not presented as a passing mood. The film traces it backward across years. Her mother died when she was young. Her father works long hours, but the camera also shows him caring for her when she is ill. Psychiatry supplies the interpretation. Caroline learned to fear that love could disappear without warning. The camera gives the viewer access to everything. Caroline alone, Caroline with her family, Caroline with Mac, the man she hoped to marry, and Caroline in the therapist's office. It turns an invisible crisis into a chain of causes the audience can follow. That was the film's achievement. Depression was not shown as wickedness, weakness, or a punchline. It had a history. The woman in pain was not beyond understanding. Treatment was possible. But the film could offer that clarity because Caroline was constructed for it. She was played by Marion Seld. According to the American Film Institute, Seld was the only professional actor in a cast of 50. Caroline was not a patient observed by chance. She was a performance, written and edited into a precise emotional arc. That distinction matters. A fictional patient can reveal exactly the right memory at exactly the right moment. Her crisis can be photographed without exposing a real patient. And the film can stop once the doctor has supplied a hopeful interpretation, even without showing a completed recovery. Caroline's story was designed to make psychotherapy legible. The design was humane, but it also made the psychiatrist's interpretation feel complete. The film did not simply ask us to sympathize with her, it taught us how to explain her. And then, 2 years later, CBS removed the actress. On March 18, 1956, CBS broadcast Out of Darkness. The surviving version opens with a declaration: there are no actors. What follows, it says, is a journey through mental disorder with real people as the guides. The program was filmed at Metropolitan State Hospital in Norwalk, California. Its central patient was identified only as Doris L. The National Library of Medicine describes the film as a record of 3 months in her life, during treatment for what the doctors then called catatonic schizophrenia. Before Doris appears, the film interviews her husband. He describes the change at home. She stopped answering him, became absorbed in religious passages, spoke about stars and the moon, and eventually became mute. He worries that sending her to the hospital may one day be held against him. Then the camera enters the treatment room. Dr. Louis Cholden introduces himself. Doris does not reply. He tells her she may sit when she wants. She remains standing. He tells her she may speak if she wants. Silence. The scene lasts. That is what gives it force. The viewer is no longer watching an actor demonstrate withdrawal. We are watching a vulnerable person endure a clinical encounter while a crew records it. The film repeatedly insists that this exposure serves a public purpose. Orson Welles reads passages written by a former patient, arguing that familiarity could replace fear, and that mental illness should carry no more shame than physical illness. William Menninger explains the hospital, the shortage of doctors, and the possibility of recovery. Those arguments were not trivial. At a time when psychiatric institutions could be distant, overcrowded, and hidden from public scrutiny, the program showed therapy, recreation, staff contact, and patients moving through ordinary social spaces. It asked the audience to replace terror with recognition. But recognition had a price, and Doris paid most of it. Her husband speaks. The doctor interprets. Menninger generalizes. Wells gives the suffering a literary voice. Doris remains silent for most of the film, and that silence becomes the program's central suspense. Weeks pass. Progress notes announce changes. Doris begins to respond to her surroundings. She joins activities. The doctor says he is beginning to see the woman beneath the illness. In the 10th week, he encourages her to talk. He asks about the hospital and why she was brought there. She resists. Then, almost 50 minutes into the surviving film, she notices a pearl. Is that a real pearl? The question is tiny. The film treats it like a door opening. Doris says she once had pearls. They were a present. She lost them. Then, through tears, she says something larger. She has lost quite a bit. It is the emotional climax, but it is also an editorial construction. 3 months of treatment become a clean television arc. Silence, contact, speech, hope. The closing narration asks why more patients cannot receive the same attention, and argues that many could return home if hospitals had sufficient staff and money. The message is reformist, not cruel. Yet the hierarchy remains unmistakable. Doris supplies the pain. Men supply nearly every explanation of what that pain means. Then a new film repeated the same suspense. Silence, waiting, one first sentence, but changed whose behavior the camera asked us to judge. In 1958, Psychiatric Nursing, the nurse-patient relationship entered a women's ward, and introduced a student nurse named Susan Davis. The film was presented by the American Nurses Association, the National League for Nursing, and the Mental Health Education Unit of Smith, Kline and French Laboratories. Its central patient is Trudy. She withdraws from contact and does not speak. Susan is assigned to spend time with her, not to extract a confession, but to build enough comfort and trust for a relationship to begin. At first, Susan approaches the assignment like a problem she must solve. She introduces herself, explains that she will be working on the ward, and tries to talk. Trudy gives almost nothing back. Susan remains with her for 10 minutes, then leaves. The film then makes an unusual turn. Instead of presenting Trudy's silence only as a symptom, it asks what Susan brings into the room: her impatience, her anxiety, her need to feel useful, and her habit of filling silence with words. During one visit, Trudy turns her face to the wall. Susan responds by talking faster. A supervisor later explains the sequence back to her. Trudy withdrew. Susan became anxious. Susan relieved her own anxiety with a flood of talk. Trudy withdrew further. For once, the professional is not merely the voice of reason. She is part of the scene, capable of disturbing it. The therapeutic tool is not a procedure or a pill. It is the nurse's ability to notice herself. That message was progressive for its time, but the film still has a carefully engineered arc. Susan returns. She learns to tolerate silence. She sits beside Trudy without demanding a response. Over months, Trudy begins to leave her room, enter the ward, and spend time near other patients. The staff changes its behavior too. Nurses and students are encouraged to include Trudy in ordinary ward life. Patients who once avoided her begin to follow that example. The film's theory of recovery expands from one expert and one patient to an environment made by many people. Near the end, Susan helps Trudy get dressed. This time, Trudy speaks clearly and asserts a preference. Susan addresses her formally. Trudy corrects her. Everyone else calls her Trudy. You can call me Trudy. Like Doris and the Pearl, it is a small sentence made enormous by everything the film has placed before it, but the meaning is different. Doris's words become proof that the doctor has reached the woman beneath the illness. Trudy's sentence establishes how she wants to be addressed. The camera has not surrendered its power. The film is still sponsored instruction, made to teach a professional audience what good care should look like. Yet its central lesson is that authority can fail when it only talks. The nurse must listen, wait, and recognize the patient as a person before the patient can meet her. 4 years later, the camera pulled even farther back. The patient was no longer the whole story. The system was. By 1962, Chain of Care widened the view. Sponsored by New York State's Department of Mental Hygiene, it moved through neighborhood clinics, a general hospital, a state hospital, and rehabilitation services. Its subject was no longer a single dramatic case. It was infrastructure. The film shows psychiatrists, psychologists, social workers, nurses, occupational therapists, children, families, and real patients. A mother meets a social worker. A child uses play therapy. Staff discuss cases together. Patients write, eat, exercise, work with their hands, join groups, and prepare for life beyond the ward. The film's optimism can feel almost architectural. The right building, the right team, the right sequence of care, and the old asylum could be replaced by something local, open, and connected to ordinary life. It contrasts psychiatric wards with the public's image of confinement. Beds are arranged as sofas. Patients write, work at tables, and eat beside staff. Later, a woman walks away from the hospital with her son after 4 weeks, having remained close to family and friends. At Hudson River State Hospital, another woman, called Mary Kay in the film, is described as depressed, withdrawn, and unable to decide. Yet she walks the grounds, joins a treatment program, and participates in group and occupational therapy. The camera now records relationships and routines, not only symptoms. This was progress in the language of the period. Earlier treatment, shorter stays, open wards, community ties, and teams rather than a single authoritative doctor. But the film is still an institutional promise made by the institution itself. It shows the system as coordinated, rational, and humane, because that is the future its sponsors want the public to support. The camera has pulled back, but it has not become neutral. That may be the most important lesson in the archive. Every film is doing 2 things at once. It reveals a world, and it organizes that world into an argument. Taken together, these films trace an extraordinary change. Caroline made suffering understandable through fiction. Doris made it undeniable through exposure. Trudy's film turned the professional relationship into part of the treatment. Chain of Care placed the individual inside a public system. They helped challenge the idea that mental illness belonged behind locked doors. They showed treatment, contact, work, family, and the possibility of return. They asked viewers to exchange shame for attention. But attention is not the same as agency. Again and again, the women are the most visible people in the frame, and the least powerful people in the explanation. Their bodies are observed. Their silence is interpreted. Their improvement is announced. Even the compassionate films tend to place authority somewhere just outside the image. In the narrator, the physician, the sponsor, or the editor who decides where the story ends. We should not watch these women as specimens, and we should not flatter ourselves that the past was simply barbaric while the present is clean. The harder question is what survives. Who controls the camera? Who defines the symptom? Who benefits when suffering becomes educational content? What does meaningful consent require when an image can circulate long after the patient, the doctor, and the original audience are gone? The films taught America what a mentally ill woman looked like. The archive leaves us with a different task: to listen beyond what the films chose to preserve,